Hello and welcome to the webinar Ethical Sourcing, Regenerative Agriculture and Leathermaking, brought to you by ILM in association with raw materials pricing website, The Sour Report. I'm Isabella Griffiths, the editor of International Leathermaker, the leading leather industry business information brand. I would like to acknowledge our webinar sponsors Prime Asia and the Leather and Hide Council of America, the LHCA. Fernando Bellesi, Chief Sustainability Officer at Prime Asia, and Stephen Sothman, President of the LHCA, will both be among our presenters today. This webinar will cover a wide range of topics around ethical sourcing strategies, developing sustainable raw materials pipelines, as well as regenerative agriculture and circularity to reduce the environmental impact of product creation. Just before I hand over to our speakers, I would like to give a brief introduction to International Leathermaker and a brief overview of what the Sour Report covers. ILM serves the global leather supply chain across several media platforms, online and through a number of other digital formats, as well as 6 printed magazines. The website, internationalleathermaker.com, is updated several times daily with the latest industry news, views, and information. Please keep an eye out for further upcoming webinars and other digital events which will be announced on our website. We also broadcast a series of industry-specific, free-to-download podcasts which form part of our View from the Top series. You can access all the podcasts by visiting the website homepage. The Sour Report was founded in 1985 and is an online raw materials pricing, analysis, and trends website which is updated daily from a network of sources from around the world and is available for paid subscribers. It provides valuable market information such as hide and skin prices and is a useful tool for traders, tanners, brands and retailers, OEMs, as well as associated suppliers. Now I'd like to introduce today's presenters. The first presentation will be by Steve Sothman, President of the Leather and Hide Council of America, who will outline ethical sourcing strategies in the US supply chain. The second presentation by Fernando Bellesi, Chief Sustainability Officer at Prime Asia, will provide an overview of the company's Responsibly Raised initiative. Finally, Mike Gass, Lead Developer, Advanced Materials at US footwear and lifestyle brand Timberland, will present a case study based on the brand's 2030 goals around sourcing and circularity. The presentations will be followed by a brief Q&A session. So I will now hand over the webinar to our first presenter, Stephen Sothman.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining, and thank you to ILM for hosting this webinar again and having me here. We really always appreciate the partnership and to be able to work with our industry partners in this way. Just as a quick reminder of who I am, in case people don't know me or my organization, I'm Steve Sothman. I'm the president of the Leather and Hide Council of America. We're the primary trade association representing everybody from meat packers through hide processors, leather tanners, and chemical companies in the leather supply chain in the U.S. We are a relatively new organization in this name, but we do have roots of these organizations in various forms going all the way back to 1919. So we've been doing this for a long time. We try to be as a full-service organization that represents every part of our industry and our supply chain as best we can. So what I'm going to be speaking to you all today about is ethical sourcing strategies in specifically the U.S. leather supply chain, the hide supply chain. Obviously, a lot of what I'm discussing can be applied to other countries, other regions. I'm just giving you the perspective from the U.S. as I know that the best, but I think it's valuable information, hopefully, for everybody in the leather supply chain and to start thinking about these types of issues. So my message today is pretty simple, frankly. In the U.S., we're a large beef producing country. We raise over 90 million head of cattle each year, and about 1/3 of those will be processed for beef consumption. And those animals are raised in a good ethical manner, and honestly, a lot of that information doesn't travel with the hide. Just for various reasons, the industry hasn't been set up over the many years to transfer that information from the live animal side through to the hide and down the leather supply chain. But we think that now is the opportunity to really change that. A lot of companies are starting to map their supply chains, do their due diligence, to look at where their products are coming from, where their raw materials are coming from, and we think that actually that's a really positive benefit for the U.S. industry, because we have a lot of great stories to tell about what's happening on the live animal side that we think the leather industry could utilize, and the brands especially who might be consumer facing with this information. So just a few quick asides before I jump into some strategies. First of all, I'll be talking about due diligence a lot, and specifically risk-based due diligence. I think a lot of people already are pretty well aware of this, but it's a good idea to kind of remind yourself what due diligence is. I like to quote the OECD's due diligence guidelines, because I think it's one of the marquee guidelines out there that really kind of describes the process for supply chain due diligence. And they describe it as: due diligence is the process through which enterprises can identify, prevent, mitigate, and account for how they address their actual and potential adverse impacts. So obviously it's very much focused on mitigating any damage that a supply chain might be doing to any number of topics or issues, whether it's the environment, human rights issues, any number of potential problems that could be caused by a supply chain. These are the tools that companies are going to be utilizing to really try to limit that. I really like to look at it as a two-sided coin, though, because there's obviously the risk mitigation aspect of it on one side, which is extremely important. But then also there are opportunities on the other side of that coin, and that's what I'm going to be focusing on today. Is okay, now that you've looked at your supply chain, now that you've really mapped it out, really understand it, what are some opportunities that are available there that you might not have realized before to unlock new marketing strategies, new stories, new claims you might be able to make in the marketplace. So when we're talking about risk-based due diligence, I'm by no means an expert on this, but in practice there are some fairly typical strategies and tools that people have to utilize in order to do this successfully. One is supply chain mapping. Of course, you do need to understand and be able to see what your supply chain looks like. And so in a lot of ways that takes mapping. There are a lot of companies who are doing a lot of great work, offer a lot of great tools on being, helping map supply chains. So those are certainly available to companies, and as well as traceability tools as well, to make sure that okay, you can see where your products are coming from in the supply chain, but then ensuring that you have an understanding of how they make their way through that supply chain, and how they might be separated from other products from other parts of your supply chain. So those are some of your basic tools. I focus on the risk-based aspect of due diligence because this is a key component in the OECD guidelines and for this process. And that risk-based in this context means commensurate to the likelihood and severity of harm. So obviously you are going to want to try to reduce risk in your supply chain after you've mapped it, but you don't need to use a blanket approach to absolutely every part of your supply chain where there might be issues. You want to address those as the risk, as your risk profile goes up or down. So for example, if your supply chain wants to limit any exposure to potential deforestation, obviously if you're sourcing hides from countries or regions that don't have large deforestation problems or large native forests to be deforested, then obviously you're not going to need to focus a whole lot of resources or attention on that part of your supply chain because it will have been kind of covered. And finally, the major thing you want to focus on, and the major tool that comes out of this due diligence approach is stakeholder and partner engagement in that supply chain. So once you know where your products are coming from, your raw materials are coming from, obviously you want to engage who the players are in that supply chain to then start both minimizing your risk and then also identifying those new opportunities that might be available to you. So as another aside before we dive in, I do want to point out and remind everybody, specifically as we're dealing with the leather supply chain and talking about this issue, that leather is a byproduct of the cattle and beef industry largely, especially when we relate it to the US. This is something that I know the vast majority of people that are listening to this webinar probably already know and probably have heard me speak about before, but it is a reminder in this, it is something I like to remind everybody about when we're talking about due diligence and supply chain mapping, because the players you'll be dealing with, the partners you'll be dealing with when you get to especially the live animal side and the meat packing side of the industry, they are not necessarily looking at the hide as one of their primary products. Obviously, the hide is it's a byproduct, and in some cases, especially recently, it's not frankly a very valuable byproduct. So their number one goal is to be producing good, wholesome, safe food, and then they want to do everything they can to obviously utilize the byproducts that result from that. But they are going to be focusing on their primary goal. So just I say that to point everybody out, just to, especially for brands who may not be very familiar with the food supply chain or the beef supply chain and haven't worked with those companies before, just to understand that they are looking at a lot of different things than you are. You're looking at the hide and your leather supply chain, but they are looking at a lot of different things. So you're going to have to work within their systems to ensure that you're getting what you need in terms of risk mitigation or marketing opportunities. So I always utilize this slide just to kind of reiterate that point, because in 2020, for example, about a year ago, our hide prices were as low as they've been in many, many years. And a hide on a steer, in the US, which is one of the higher value hides, was only 1.25% of the value of the live animal. So 1% of the entire animal's value was its hide. So we really are talking about a byproduct that is often an afterthought in some ways. Okay, so let's jump in and talk about road mapping, how you can be partnering with your supply chain partners in the U.S. hide industry or beef and cattle industry to again, do your due diligence and unlock some new opportunities. As I said at the beginning, this probably also applies to other regions and countries, but I'm focusing on the U.S. specifically. So your opportunity here really is, one, map your supply chain. That in and of itself is going to be, I think, a good outcome for your company. This is something that you're going to need to do anyway in a lot of ways, as more third-party certification organizations require this, and even as legal structures begin to require it. You're going to want to do that anyway as a company. Once you do that, you'll be able to identify your risks and opportunities. You'll start to see what your exposure is to some things that you as a company don't want to be contributing to, that might have a negative impact on certain parts of the globe or our social order. So you'll be able to see those risks. Like I've been saying all along, though, you're also, I think, going to start seeing your opportunities there. You're going to say, oh, okay, these hides I'm buying, the leather I'm buying has hides that were raised under these programs for these animals in animal welfare or in feeding programs or in any other type of criteria. That's gonna be your opportunity to perhaps start marketing in a little bit different way. And as I mentioned, you're gonna have to then engage your stakeholders once you have your map and you can see who are the players along the supply chain. Then you need to start engaging with them and talking to them, seeing what's possible from their perspective in terms of providing this information and ensuring that you're receiving it, and obviously providing them with the incentives to do that too. It's not something that's necessarily going to be cheap or for free. So, but I think that in total, the value will be there for everybody along the supply chain as long as that information is shared openly. And then obviously ensure you have your appropriate levels of traceability in place so that if you are starting to pull some of these new marketing claims forward in your supply chain for marketing purposes, that you can trace that product back and ensure that you have control of your supply chain and the products in it. I've underlined appropriate level of traceability here for this because traceability means different things to different people. Depending on what you are trying to do in your company and what standards you're trying to meet, you might need more or less traceability there, just depending on your operations. So a company that's sourcing from a lot of different areas, a lot of different companies, a lot of different regions, bringing them all to a central location or locations and not mixing them together, but bringing them into the same facilities, probably is going to have a lot of traceability that can relate individual hides, individual pieces of leather back to where they came from. Other companies who are only dealing with hides from one region, one company, one area of the country probably don't need that level of traceability. The individual marks. They can probably do it in a way that's a little bit more lotting system based, or paper based. Just understanding that everything they're utilizing comes from those specific places. And then finally, this is, I think, probably the most important part, and what I'm interested to see what other people are able to do with it, is you need to tell the story. You need to then go utilize that information that you've been able to find in your supply chain, and start to market it and start to utilize it for your benefit and for the benefit of the entire supply chain. So this obviously falls in the hands of our PR folks, our marketing folks, but I'm really interested to see how people start to utilize some of that information. And I think that's a great opportunity. So let me just give you an example of how I think this would work in practice within the US. So you've done your supply chain analysis. You find out that your company, either you already knew it or you find out that your company is utilizing a lot of hides from the US. And you're focused on animal welfare as an issue. So you want to make sure that your supply chain is secure from an animal welfare perspective. Well, first of all, if the hides are coming from the US, from your due diligence and kind of supply chain risk perspective, you already know that there's a robust federal and state-based animal welfare legislation regime in the United States. We are a rule of law country, so we have a lot of enforcement around those laws. And so already from that perspective, your risk profile on an animal welfare is pretty small, despite what, and I know there's plenty of NGOs out, animal rights NGOs or media outlets that are trying to tell you otherwise, but in reality, you've got a pretty small risk profile there. And then you can go on top of that and look at, okay, well, what other programs are available in the United States that I might be able to market off of when it comes to animal welfare? Well, for example, one of the programs that goes all the way to the live animal side, that the on-farm side of our cattle system, is called the Beef Quality Assurance Program, BQA, and there's also equivalents in dairy and in pork and some of the other livestock industries as well. Under that program, it's a very highly prescriptive how these animals need to be raised, how they should be treated to ensure that they have the maximum amount of welfare. And those programs are third-party audited and certified and that type of thing. So that's 85% of our cattle supply chain in the U.S. are raised under those programs. So already right there, you can start seeing as a leather user, as a brand, or as a tanner, that you've got this information in your supply chain, and you can start to make claims on that and advertise off of that. On top of that, another example would be cattle raising claims. These go beyond just your baseline welfare programs. There are a lot of programs out there that are third-party certified by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, a group called the Agricultural Marketing Service, AMS, that's certify other raising claims that might be in the supply chain. So, for example, if animals have been raised all on grass, they're totally grass-fed, there's a program for that. If they've never been given any artificial hormones, there's a program for that. Responsible antibiotic use, animal welfare, other animal welfare standards, those types of things. So there's a lot of information out there that you can find about your U.S. supply chain that then, again, you could be working with your partners to pull forward. So I will wrap it up there. Again, this is a very broad overview. I think there's a lot of opportunity in the leather supply chain to not only mitigate its risk through its due diligence approach, but then also identify those new opportunities for marketing claims and to help raise the tide for everybody in our industry to sell and utilize more leather. So it all starts with your supply chain mapping. I think that's square, that's number one for everybody, and then from there build your partnerships. So I'll stop there and take questions, and I appreciate everybody's attention.
Thank you very much, Steve, for this overview and the ethical sourcing strategies you have outlined, and for setting the scene for us a little bit, which will tie in nicely with our next presenters and topics. And now over to our second presenter, Fernando Bellesi.
Thanks, Isabella and ILM for putting this together, for inviting us to share this project. Thanks also everybody for watching this. This is a project that we are very proud. We like to share with our partners, with our customers. So thank you all for being present today. The initiative that we would like to share with you all today is called Responsibly Raised. This is an initiative that we launched in the beginning of last year, and this was driven by our needs to engage our supply chain and our belief that if we engage our supply chain, we can help the entire supply chain to generate best practice. So we thought that we need to look for those projects, for those partners in the supply chain that are walking the extra mile, that are delivering something else in terms of environmental best practice at farm level, and see how we could promote those practices to generate a virtuous cycle that would consequently result in further improvements in the supply chain. So last year we started by defining what the Responsibly Raised initiative would be and what we expect from those programs joining the initiative. And we set 6 main areas which we thought was important to be covered on our Responsibly Raised initiative. So for a program to be covered, to be part of the Responsibly Raised initiative, this program would have to ensure sound animal welfare standards all the way to farm level, not only when we are talking about transportation, packing facilities, but at farm level as well. They would have to ensure everything at farm level, the better use of natural resources, to ensure that the environmental part of farming is well managed, so you are reducing impact, you are lowering your emissions. To be part of Responsibly Raised, the program has also to ensure traceability back to the farm of birth. All our leathers, they are traceable back to the slaughterhouse, and by tracing back to the slaughterhouse, we are able to also trace to the direct suppliers. But in this program, in this initiative, to be framed as Responsibly Raised, it's required to also trace back to the farm of birth. So we're talking about indirect suppliers. Ensure good labor practices, and moreover, sustain all those claims through third-party verification. So this is the general concept around Responsibly Raised. And we start by looking for partners, working with our partners in the supply chain to identify projects that would fit within those concepts, that we could develop it together, so they would fit within those attributes. We started first looking at raw materials in the US. So we started first working with a program called Open Prairie Natural Meats, which, as the name says, it's focused on the production of natural meats, which are connected to more natural cattle raising and non-use of hormones, pesticides, strong animal welfare. So this program covers the steer demand, the demand for steer hides. And then the second project that we included in our initiative is a project with Minerva Leather in Brazil, where we get the hides from organic farms. So farms that are certified against organic standards. So these are the two first partners we have in this project, and I'm going to be talking about each of them in more details right now. So as I mentioned, in the USA, in our steers program, we partnered with this project that is aimed at the production of natural meats. And they look at a lot of different things to be able to sustain the claim of natural meats. And we are able, as a consequence, to also ensure best practices that are connected to the hides. On this case, all leathers are traceable to the farm of birth. This is a very important requirement from our Responsibly Raised. All the animals, they are fed on a 100% vegetarian diet with no use of antibiotics, no hormones or growth promotants. Also connected to animal welfare. The farms need to be verified against recognized animal welfare standards. And as I mentioned, not only the farmers, but also feedlots, transportation, and the packing facilities. Everybody's must be in line with the best animal welfare standards. Most of the life of the animal is spent on pastures, and there's an extra layer of land stewardship environmental practice, which is also verified at farm level. When we talk about animal welfare, which I've just mentioned, there is a certification, a verification scheme called Farm Check Program, and they look at the 5 animal freedoms, and they are looking for things such as ensuring that the animals have the right nutrition, that they receive the right care that results in adequate health, that the people are trained to handle those animals correctly, avoiding stress, avoiding pain, that the animals are able to express their behavior, their natural behavior. So it's a pretty extensive program in terms of animal welfare. It also covers environmental practice, as I mentioned. This program is connected to the Beef Quality Assurance Program in the US. So there's a whole chapter about how you can ensure that you are using the environmental inputs, the environmental resources in the best way possible, how you are keeping the right stocking rates, how you're managing the pastures. It also looking to monitor and manage key environmental controls, so you ensure that your soil is being held correctly, that you're protecting your water sources, and it looks at an important part of environmental management, which is the responsible usage, storing, and disposal of pesticides. The other program, the organic beef production, this is in focus on South American hides. We've started in Brazil, but it covers also other countries. So this program, just as a starting point, I thought it was important to show the definition of what is an organic program. And in general, it's a group of practices that integrates cultural, biological, and mechanical practice to foster the cycling of resources, to promote ecological balance, conservation, and biodiversity, which in the end of the day, it's very connected to the things we are looking at responsibly raised. When we look to how this fits into our responsibly raised in more details, it's interesting to note that the farms and the beef processing facilities, they are all certified against 2 different organic programs. So they are certified against the USA and the European organic regulations. And why does that matters? It's because even though most of those 2 programs, they overlap each other, they also have some additional areas which each of those covers. So in the end of the day, you have a stronger and more robust standard when they are certified against both standards. And important to remember that the tanneries are also all LWG rated tanneries. And talking about the organic standard and how that impacting in the way that the farms are run, you see when you start looking at the standard, the verification protocol, there are a lot of regenerative practices that are covered in that program, things that are intended to maintain and improve the physical, chemical, and biological condition of soil, but also techniques such as crop rotations, such as rotational grazing, use of animal materials as a fertilizer, that helps not only to maintain soil fertility, but to improve the efficiency of those farms and improve the production itself. At the same time, it looks for how the protection of water sources, wetlands. So you're not only ensuring the well-being of the animals, you are not only ensuring the maintenance of the environment, but you are ensuring that those resources, they will last and they will sustain for a long time. Also connected to the organic standard, they look at the avoidance of synthetic pesticides and fertilizers and no use of hormones and growth promotants, which is those things are restricted under the organic standard. When you talk about animal welfare, the organic certification is not an animal welfare verification scheme, but it does cover the most important aspects of the best practice available in terms of animal welfare. You can, when you're looking to the aspects of animal welfare covered by the organic certification, you'll find all the 5 animal freedoms covered within the certification. So you are talking about the animal health care, nutrition, proper handling, conditions for the animals to express natural behavior, the minimization of pain, stress, so that all those important things are covered under the certification. Because we are talking about raw materials from South America and more specifically from Brazil in this initial stage, we thought it was important to also ensure that those farms, they are not involved in illegal deforestation, rural conflicts. And this program here works in a very unique way. They have a monitoring system that uses satellite images, georeference maps from suppliers, access to available private and public databases. And by overlapping all that information, they are able to monitor each of the farms supplying to the program. And through that monitoring, it's possible to see if they are listed in the list of the Ministry of Environment for embargoed areas, if they are in the Ministry of Labor blacklist for forced labor, but moreover, if they are involved with illegal deforestation or invasions of protected indigenous areas and environmental protected areas. Just as an example, this is a screenshot of the program. All hides generated at the slaughterhouse, they receive a stamp, and that stamp has a unique code that recognizes the farm, that identifies the farm. I've been working for more than 10 years in the leather industry, and I haven't seen such a comprehensive program in terms of traceability. The interesting thing here is that because these are organic farms and they are all full cycle farms, so when you identify that specific farm, you are identifying also the farm of birth, where the animal spent its entire life. So you address also the issue related to indirect suppliers. Just to show you how it works, instead just showing a print, we have access to this platform, this online platform that was developed by Minerva and their partners, and you have the chance to search the invoice, or you can search a specific stamp. So we at Primasia, we have access to their system, and we can enter the stamp number that we see in the hide. I'm just getting one here that I've searched before, and we can online access the information about that farm. So any brand coming to our facilities and looking at Responsibly Raised, they can call us, they can make a web conference, we'll get the hide, and we'll get the stamp, and we can make this verification straight away. So what you are seeing, it's my internet browser with information I've just entered. And the interesting thing, you see not only where the farm is, the boundaries, you're gonna have the georeferenced information. It shows also if the farm is blocked or unblocked against the compliance standards. You can also check the compliance list of what those farms are being verified against, so you know exactly against what they are complying. And not only that, we can use the QR code. We can send the QR code to our customers. If they are in a video conference, they can also scan our QR code to receive this information in their computer, in their cell phone. So it's, as I said, it's a very unique and comprehensive monitoring and traceability tool, which I haven't seen anything that goes that far in the leather industry. Now going back to the presentation, when you put all those things together, in the end of the day, what we want you to achieve is to ensure that we have a value chain that is responsible from beginning to end. So by looking at farms, we are able to ensure that they have the best practices in terms of environmental stewardship, strong animal welfare standards, that they are ensuring fair labor standards, and they are being verified, so you can make those claims in a more confident way. When you go to the tannery side, you can still use those hides to get all the iconic leathers made by Primasia. You can use them in new developments. We are not talking about a product specifically. We are talking about a raw material base that can be used in our products. And not only it carries the responsible farming, but they are processing in very efficient facilities. They are processing LWG rated facilities. They are finished in both our operations in China and Vietnam that are both gold rated. They are traceable back to the farm. They are ZDHC MRSL compliant. So it's you have a lot of different attributes behind that leather that in the end of the day you can use in your responsible footwear. You can tell that story to your consumers, and you can also manage ensure that you are working with a reliable supply chain. And just to finish my presentation here, another point which is very important to mention, we started this as a small initiative covering a few projects, but we are approaching this as a long-term strategy, moreover as a long-term procurement policy. And our vision is to get this to get all our suppliers as part of the responsibly raised, carrying the same standards. So everything we carry in Prime Asia in a few years, we expect it to be part of our responsibly raised initiative. Of course, in order to achieve that, we need to accelerate demand. It doesn't work if we are working with those farms, but our customers, consumers don't see demand for that, but we believe they see, and we are promoting the initiative to our partner, our customers, so they can help us to generate demand for those practices. It's also important to have these as a long-term policy, as a policy that we can communicate to our suppliers so they can help us to develop solutions. We don't raise cattle. We are not a food company. We need to work together with the supply chain in order to develop those solutions. And moreover, by having a clear policy, a clear position of where we want to be in a few years, we are able to also engage new suppliers, engage new partners, engage new organizations in developing those practices and in raising the standards in our industry, because we believe as an industry, we can contribute to this discussion, and we can contribute to best practice all the way to the farm level. So I would like to finish my presentation here. Again, I would like to thank ILM for organizing, for putting this together, and you all for attending. And I would be more than happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fernando, for this great presentation and for outlining Prime Asia's Responsibly Raised program. And finally, for our third presentation by Mike Gass.
Hello, I'd like to thank Isabella for this opportunity to join the discussion about ethical sourcing in regenerative agriculture and leather making, and the opportunity to join the webinar. My name is Michael Gass. I work as a lead developer on the advanced materials team for Timberland, and I also work closely with our corporate social responsibility team in creation of the brand's product goals and how we can reach those goals through both the sourcing of our materials and how we build our products. I'm grateful for the opportunity and super excited to share our recently launched product innovation vision and 2030 goals and talking about regenerative agriculture. This past fall, Timberland launched a new product innovation vision, which really is the inspiration behind our 2030 goals. The vision reads, inspired by nature, Timberland will design net positive products for a greener future, giving back more than we take. This vision represents what consumers will come to know Timberland for, and also it will serve as our guide for the future of our product creation. So you can see the vision says we're inspired by nature. One of the things we know about nature, of course, is that nature is circular. If we think about the Lion King, this is a familiar image, the circle of life. There are so many great examples of natural cycles all around us. And really, nature teaches us that nothing should ever go to waste. We can apply this concept of circularity by using recycled materials as we create our products, but then importantly, ensuring those materials are designed into our products in a way that maintains their recyclability and reusability. So at the end of a long and useful life, those products can be recycled again. Through this approach, we know we can drastically reduce the negative impacts and waste associated with product creation and heads toward the idea of neutrality or zero impact. However, we believe that neutrality isn't really good enough. And so to tip the scale into the net positive space comes our commitment to the regenerative agriculture and ranching. Taking inspiration from nature again, we know that nature is inherently regenerative. The environment possesses this incredible ability to heal and restore itself. And this happens when humans work in harmony with it, as indigenous populations have done for thousands of years. So that's exactly what we're aiming to do by supporting farmers and land stewards who are using regenerative agriculture practices in order to actually help restore the land we source from, building environmental benefits into the supply chain. So that leads us to this formula here, which is really how we aim to achieve net positivity as a brand. For us and our products, it's the combination of circular design to minimize the negative impacts of product creation, plus regenerative sourcing to maximize environmental benefits in our supply chain, so that we net out in this positive space where we're giving back more than we take. And to us, the concept of net positivity is an evolution on the idea of sustainability. To sustain is really to keep things as they are. However, we know the environment is already in a severely degraded state, so we can't just sustain that, especially when we have the amazing opportunity in front of us to actually help restore the environments we source from and create a world that's more alive, more abundant, and more resilient than the world we have today. Supporting that vision statement come our 2030 goals here is really the tangible, measurable proof points we're working toward. The overarching goal is for our products to have a measurable net positive impact on the earth, like a boot that helps put more carbon back into the soil than it emits during production, starting with a focus on climate positivity, but expanding into other impact categories like biodiversity and water in the future. We're aiming to get there by sourcing 100% of our natural materials from regenerative agriculture and designing 100% of our products for circularity. We'll be measuring and reporting on these goals as we go. We recognize these are really bold goals. In order to achieve them, we know we need to start piloting innovations, which we're doing across all of our top volume materials. So just briefly, we're looking at regenerative leathers coming out of the US and Australia. We're looking at taking regenerative rubber from Thailand. We're starting to look at regenerative sugarcane, which we use in our EVA in Brazil. And then we're looking to India and Haiti to source regenerative cotton. So these big goals are certainly daunting for us as a brand, and we know we have many challenges ahead of us. But that said, we're motivated by the fact that we've already taken some major steps toward these goals and have already learned some valuable lessons during the first stages of the journey. First, the importance is just really getting started. It's just about the piloting that I described on the slide before. We have designated space in our line called EK, which is short for Earth Keepers, which is where we launch our pinnacle eco-innovation pilots, which serve as pathfinders for the brand. The pilots serve as proof of concept, showing it can be done. Even though they're small to start, it triggers a snowball effect. And second, we test and learn. We identify these key levers for scale and then find the efficiencies of scale as a result. The second lesson we have learned is the importance of announcing the goals publicly. From our experience, every act of announcing goals publicly is actually a major factor in making them possible to achieve. We've seen this in a couple tangible ways. Sending a clear demand signal to suppliers rather than us doing all the heavy lifting, bringing these opportunities to our suppliers as we've done for early stage pilot projects. They are going out and finding these things, bringing them to us, expanding our reach in a way that enables the suppliers to step up their own game to meet our demand. The second benefit we've seen is from publicly announcing is that it also triggers collaboration, not just within our supply chain, but within the industry and even across industries. So there are many opportunities for brands to work together and as a result, drastically reduce the collective frictions to achieving these goals. And third, we're keeping people inspired internally, especially at the start of this work and the pilot phase. There are some major heavy lifts required. And what we found is that the inspiration can serve as a fuel for internal teams to get through those challenging stages. There's some tactics to support this. One is thinking about the impact we have beyond the Timberland supply chain, looking at how we can be a catalyst for even greater change. We're really excited about this intersection between nature and fashion. The opportunity to shift the fashion industry from today being focused on making beautiful products to in the future being focused on making the world more beautiful through how these same beautiful products are made. Bigger picture thinking can serve as a source of inspiration. The next, maybe even more tangible way we've been working to keep internal teams inspired is by hosting farmers at our global headquarters to present and share firsthand the tangible benefits they see on land as a result of these focus areas. We get the teams excited and inspired about the real world on the ground impacts we can help realize through the way we source and make our products. So on that note, speaking of farmers and keeping inspired, I can tell you specifically about our regenerative leather program. I'm going to start by giving a quick overview of regenerative agriculture, drilling down into what that looks like for cattle ranching specifically and how we're verifying it within our own supply chains and how we're looking to scale that over time, both in the US and other countries. So on this slide, you can see we've got some statistics which may not be unfamiliar. 75% of our land is broken, existing in a degenerated state. But we also can say that the problem is the solution. There's too much carbon in the atmosphere and not enough carbon in the soil, and plants can fix that. Without the carbon in the soil becomes dust. Carbon is the glue made by the microbes that hold soil together and build the health. So how does regenerative agriculture work? There's a few different ways to look at it. There's a planned rotational grazing where the animals are moved around the land to mimic the movements, tightly bunched herding of animals in the wild. There's no-till, where basically to plant seeds, a blade cuts a thin slit through the existing plant residue. This causes minimal disturbance to the soil structure. For in typical tilling, the soil is plowed very deep and there's carbon release back into the atmosphere. There's also the planting of cover crops, where additional crops are planted to cover bare ground between crop rows and between planting cycles to protect and build the soil. And then there's either no chemicals or reduced amount of chemicals necessary, as biological pest management and healthy living soils can replace harmful chemicals. So basically, fresh water is replenished, farmers are more prosperous, the soil biology is restored, and carbon is sequestered. So there's a lot of wins from just these changes around how we're looking at raising the cattle. So as I mentioned, how does it work? There's adaptive multi-paddock grazing, which mimics the herd movements, stimulates growth of grasses, and pulls carbon out of the air and stores it in the soil. Imagine tightly bunched herds of animals moving frequently around the land as they search for food and protect themselves from predators. That type of movement is what ranchers replicate on their land. This land co-evolved with herd animals, so when you do just that, you help restore the carbon cycle, and cattle can stimulate the growth of grasses. It's really incredible potential and something that we're very excited about as a brand to use our sourcing power to support the farmers who are on the front lines doing this incredible work. The regenerative leather sourced from farms that pull carbon out of the air where there's too much and store it in the ground where there's too little, restoring the health and vitality of the land, a holistic land management approach that leverages the power of nature to heal the earth. So how do we know it's regenerative? And how do we know that we're verifying that these practices are happening in our supply chain? Let me start by saying this is a rapidly evolving space with many different certifiers and verifiers and protocols constantly popping up. So we have developed an initial regenerative leather sourcing policy, but we'll continue to evolve this. The two main requirements are a grass-fed certification, that the animals are 100% grass-fed for their entire lives, rather than ending up in a feedlot. We're predominantly working with the AGA, Savory, and Audubon to determine whether or not these practices are taking place. And second, there's an outcome or practice-based certification or verification of regeneration. So basically, we need the farmers to sign up for a program that's going to show whether or not their land is improving based on the practices I described in the first point. And then second, by doing soil measurements as a baseline, and then coming back at a later date to do them again to determine whether or not the carbon is actually being stored in the ground. As we have journeyed closer to the origin of these leather materials, we formed partnerships with businesses along the way. One of those businesses is Other Half Processing. OHP, as they are known, is a newer business creating the direct relationships with the regenerative ranchers. OHP is securing, preserving, and transporting these hides from the ranches to the wet blue tannery DR Diedrich. OHP has created the necessary traceability and chain of custody all the way back to the farm. Their services are an essential part of the process for Timberland to be able to claim that these hides are certified regenerative. So as I mentioned, the importance of doing the pilots, we're also just talking about how we're expanding this. Regenerative agriculture is sort of in its infancy, and there isn't really enough of the leather generated regeneratively for us to make a transition 100%. So we're basically building this supply chain from the ground up. And as we do that, we're looking for other sources of these hides in different areas. There's also opportunity, as I mentioned earlier, for collaboration with companies from other industries such as the meat and food industry, where we're both interested in the same animal, just different parts of the animal. And then as the LCA space and carbon sequestration research and development evolve, our policies will evolve with them, and we'll learn from the emerging science and the conversations. So in fall 20, the culmination of the early work that we have done with our partners, Savory, and with Other Half Processing, we were able to bring our first 2 regeneratively made boots to market. Ever since fall 20, we have been growing our use of regenerative leather, and obviously have quite a long journey in front of us to switch 100% of our leather being sourced from farms employing these practices. But as I said, the importance was in taking that first step, setting that bold vision, and then getting excited about the work we can do along the way to improve our product and ultimately improve our environments and the planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was a really insightful and pertinent insight into Timberland's supply chain and its sourcing approach. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You can post a question to any of the presenters using the GoToWebinar control panel on your screen. Questions that we haven't covered today will be forwarded to our speakers so they can respond. Please make sure you specify the name of the presenter your question is addressed to. So now we have a number of questions for our presenters, and Steve, I'll start with you. In your presentation, you said that partnership opportunities, mainly with hide traders and meat packers, are vital in connecting the dots of lost information and traceability along the supply chain. Now, a lot of hide traders and meat packers are already implementing animal welfare and traceability programs in their operations. Do you find that there is willingness to cooperate with the leather supply chain and exchange this information?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely willingness and increasing willingness too. I mean, I think this industry, historically has looked at its, a lot of its own information, internal information as its proprietary information, and hasn't really necessarily wanted to share that. But I think that is, as a culture, the industry is changing quite a bit. What I would say though is, the partnership aspect of it is key. Really working with those companies in a hand-in-hand way to say, okay, we're trying to do this. Let's say we're trying to develop a claim around animal welfare, for example. How can we ensure that we're getting that, through our partners, and what can we do to support that with our partners, financially or otherwise, so that we're all benefiting? I think if companies are just going to meat packers or hide processors and saying, I want grass-fed only hides, give those to me, that's not going to work. So it really does have to be a partnership approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, cooperation is key there, definitely. On one of the slides, you highlighted that the hide is a byproduct of the food industry, and the figure allocated a price to the hide. Can this value go up or down, or is it always a fixed percentage of the total value of each animal?
Yeah, great question, Isabel, and something we have a lot of materials on, and actually we'll have a lot more materials coming out about. But yes, the answer is yes. Obviously, the hide price and the meat price or the cattle price are inelastically related, meaning that one does not necessarily influence the other. So the price of hides and the price of cattle can go up and down each and every day, unrelated to each other. And so, yeah, you will see that value change. Well, I'll give you a little preview though. Our organization has funded some research recently that looked at what is that actual economic relationship between the hide price and the live cattle price, and how are they economically related to each other from a modeling perspective. And we found that there's little to no link, and the link that is there from a kind of academic perspective is 1/3 of 1%. So extremely small. high prices not driving cattle production, but a little bit more informed than just looking at the spot prices on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's a really good piece of information there. Thanks for clarifying that. And finally, one of the points you raise is quite eloquently is tell the story. So are positive initiatives such as high farming and cattle raising and animal welfare standards, or the due diligence that you mentioned, are they all part of a positive narrative that can be used to tell this story and ultimately change the image and the perception of leather?
Yeah, absolutely. Frankly, it's fundamental to it at this point. People who are detractors of this industry, leather included, but cattle and meat production, they are using those stories and the misinformation around those stories to pursue their agenda. So I think using that exact same information, but the truth of it, to then try to counter a lot of that misinformation is exactly what this industry needs to be doing in order to bolster the story, talk about the very good things that are happening in this supply chain, and really celebrate what we're all doing, which really has been unfortunately hidden from a lot of public view previously. So let's get that out there.
Thank you very much for that, Steve, and for going into a little bit more detail on all those points. Thank you. So Fernando, we have a few questions for you. Firstly, how important is it for the supply chain monitoring to go back to the farm level? And how difficult was it to establish such a robust and comprehensive traceability and monitoring system?
Well, thank you, Isabella. And this is actually a very interesting question. I think when we talk about transparency, this is not only related to leather. The world has changed, and transparency it's a must in all industries. And I would say that in the leather industry, it has improved a lot in the last few years, and you see more and more options being presented. But there's still a challenge, which is I would call it the last link of the traceability, which is connect to the indirect suppliers before the direct supplier that sources the animals to the processing facilities. And this is something that people are discussing more. Our customers, they are interested in that because this connects to best practices. It connects to being able to make claims about those practices, but also about risk management. So it is a next step that we as an industry have to look at. And we decided that we had to start sooner rather than late. And it's not easy. I don't think we can say this is something that will be achieved for 100% of our supply chain in a couple of years. But what we can see from the research we've been doing, from the work we've been doing with Responsibly Raised, is that this is possible. And by working with our partners, by working with our suppliers, we are mapping where we can start, where we can implement those things first. And hopefully our intention here with Responsibly Raised is that by promoting those cases where we can go farther upstream in the supply chain, we'll start create a dialogue that will help to raise those traceability standards across the entire industry.
Great. It sounds like the collaboration and the dialogue aspects are really critical here, as you said. Would you say that initiatives such as the Responsibly Raised program can go some way towards improving the image of leather overall, because solid frameworks around animal welfare, high farming standards, and robust monitoring systems can be demonstrated, seeing as animal welfare is often the key criticism that is cited by anti-leather lobby groups?
We strongly believe in that, and we think even though as I mentioned in my presentation, even though tanneries, they don't raise cattle, they don't buy cattle, we may think that it's too far from us. We understand that we still have at least an indirect responsibility for those supply chains. So by engaging in those discussions, by being clear to our suppliers about the standards we are looking for, we start a proactive discussion we start engaging with them on how those things can be achieved, and we generate best practice. By generate best practice, of course, we help to improve the image of our industry. I think there's a lot of negative exposure to our industry, and some of those exposures they are correct. Some of those exposures not that much. And but we at Primeasia, we believe that farming it's a part of the solution. It's not a part of the problem. The question here is how we can engage with the farms that are doing the best, how we can also promote, how we can generate further improvements in other farms to be sure that the solution is applied throughout the industry.
Yes, indeed. I think this is a sentiment that many of our audience can share. And finally, concerns have been raised by environmental groups and NGOs that even with geomapping, some cattle in illegally deforested areas may still enter the food supply chain when sold to third-party farmers from farmers who are part of the monitoring program. How can you be 100% sure this cannot happen with your Responsibly Raised program?
That's the importance of traceability, and more important in this case, the traceability back to the farm of birth. We believe that only when you know where your materials are coming from, you are able to control what you're getting. And that's why we think that Responsibly Raised has an important role in giving that transparency, in looking at how you can see your entire supply chain. When you talk about deforestation, in Primeasia supply chain specifically, it would be more connected to South America. And that's why in South America, we looked for a program where we would be able to see the whole supply chain all the way to the farm of birth, because by having that visibility, by being able to monitor those farms, to check their compliance against our standards, we can avoid issues such as deforestation or other rural conflicts, poor labor conditions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Fernando, for elaborating on these points for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mike, I've got a few questions for you. As you've outlined, Timberland has pledged that by 2030, 100% of its products will create a net positive impact on the earth, going beyond the concept of sustainability. And that means that 100% of its natural materials will be sourced from regenerative agriculture. How challenging is it for an established brand such as yours to rebuild a supply chain from the ground up with regenerative agriculture? Yeah, and how are you scaling this? Does it mean that the more regenerative agricultural sources you add, the more you drop conventional ones from your sources?
Yeah, that's great. Excellent question and very difficult work. It's extremely challenging to make these switches to the supply chain, right? We are, in some cases, finding regenerative sources to be copious and readily available. And then as in the case with leather, we've had to build them from the ground up, literally from trying to figure out where to find the first regenerative hide for use in our products. And so as we journey down that road, we're just trying to figure out what relationships do we need to make and how are we looking at this differently, other than in the former times when we would just write a PO and just order a material from a supplier. We're oftentimes partnering with nonprofits or businesses such as OHP who have propped up in this space to help us identify where we can find regenerative materials, and then other times help farmers and ranchers to transition some of their practices to regenerative practices in order to create the supply chain. And that's what I was referring to in the presentation, where we're just piloting different programs in different parts of the world, whether it be for leather or for cotton or for rubber. But it's difficult, and obviously with those goals being set as they are, if we're going to reach them at 2030, essentially, yes, we're going to be sourcing all of our materials from regenerative sources, and as we can increase that supply in a workable way for the brand, we will be reducing our sourcing from those sources that aren't using the regenerative practices, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it leads me nicely to my next question, actually. So if I understand correctly, leather is Timberland's top volume natural material. But this initiative is the first time that your brand has actually directly engaged with suppliers at the very start of the value chain. What would you say, what opportunities does this provide? And how important is it for brands such as Timberland to engage with the whole leather supply chain and work together on sustainable solutions and best practices?
You know, I think it's been really important for the brand to help in its evolution, right? As we think a little bit more directly about where we're getting our materials from, what our responsibilities are as a brand, and how we can enrich that whole process, not only for us and for how consumers see us as a brand, but also for the people involved in providing the materials that we're using. You know, I think I did mention it before that Timberland has been partnering with nonprofits and businesses specifically targeting these areas of opportunity to create the relationships with the farmers and the ranches, working with the Savory Institutes to support large-scale transitions to regenerative cattle ranching and the measurement of the benefits on the ground. And then, as I mentioned, we have a great debt of gratitude to Other Half Processing to really help build the industry's first regenerative supply chain, specifically designed to deliver the added value back to the ranchers and to incentivize the regenerative practices that other ranchers can join.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like you've got a really good partnership there that you can certainly build on in the future. And circular design is obviously part of your whole strategy, but footwear is notoriously a hard product to recycle as it consists of so many components. Would you say you've achieved the ultimate circular shoe?
Not yet. It is a bit of the holy grail, right? But we've made really significant progress, and we are really excited about some of our product that's soon to come to market. We have developed some different construction techniques, and we are partnering with other new businesses that are specifically focused on disassembly and recycling. So there's a lot to identify, right? Not only do we have to think about how we select the materials that go into the shoe, but ultimately we have to think about it from that holistic view of what's going to happen to this shoe after it's done being worn in its first life. Can it be resold? Can it be disassembled and recycled? Can it be disassembled and used in other products? So there is a lot to think about, and we certainly have not achieved the perfect circular shoe. But we're really excited about being on the journey and the incredible things that we're learning along the way.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm pretty sure all our audience and myself will be eagerly following your progress and you know how things will be developing in the future. So once again, Mike, thank you so much for your time and for talking us through all these points and Timberland's approach. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Have a great day.
So this concludes our webinar for today. A big thank you to our presenters for sharing their knowledge, strategies and insights. I would also like to thank Prime Asia and the LHCA once again for their sponsorship. We will be posting the full webinar online shortly in case you would like to listen to it again. A link to the recording will also be sent out to everyone who registered for today's presentations. Finally, you will now be asked a short survey about today's webinar, which will give us valuable feedback to ensure we're offering content that continues to be of interest to you. As mentioned at the beginning, ILM and the SAWA Report will be hosting more free-to-attend webinars as well as new podcasts over the coming weeks and months, so please keep an eye out for future topics on the ILM website. Our contact details can be seen on the screen in front of you now. Thank you for listening and goodbye.